Thanks everyone for coming. For those who don't know, I think I know many people here, but my name is Andee. I'm one of the music faculty here at College of San Mateo. And this is the third installment of our music and technology lecture series. Next week, before I forget also, I just want to give a heads up, and there's flyers by the door. Jeannie Parson, same time, same place, 12:30 in this room next Wednesday. We'll have our fourth installment and fourth and last for this semester in our lecture series. Jeannie Parson, she currently works for Microsoft, is that right? Yeah, and she's kind of spent her entire career in music and sound design for games. So she'll be here to talk about that, and hope you all can join us for our last talk next week. Also, just want to say thank you to Perkins and Strong Workforce. This series wouldn't be possible without their funding, so we really appreciate their support and the whole support of the Strong Workforce team. Of course, we also are grateful for support from our division, College of San Mateo in general, and our division, Creative Arts and Social Science Division, and our leader over there, Dean Jean-Marie Velikovic, as well as our division assistant, V.G. Raman. Couldn't do it without them. And also couldn't do it without the wonderful support of Nicolas Fernandez, instructional aide, who's filming right now, also made the flyer, and our general in-house flyer maker. Queen Manili, who is our student assistant, running the soundboard. So thank you to all of you. Of course, Chris Bobrowski, our electronic music lead. So thanks everyone for coming. And Andee Connors is someone it's hard for me to even know where to start when I'm trying to introduce him, because he's worn so many different hats, I feel like, in the music ecosystem. So first and foremost, I think of Andee as a musician and a drummer. Before I even met Andee officially, I had heard of him because actually this is my freshman year of college. I don't know if I ever told you this, Andee, but my freshman year of college, one of my dorm neighbors down the hall was obsessed with this band, and he was blasting their music out of his dorm room, was trying to get everyone into that band. He wanted his band to sound like this band, and that band was A Minor Forest, which was Andee's old band from San Francisco. Well, I guess it's officially a San Francisco band, right? 90s. So that was my first introduction to Andee, but then I officially met him when we worked on what was then called the curation team at Pandora, the streaming platform. And Andee, he has been a record label owner or ran a record label, his own record label, released many albums on that. He used to run and was an owner of aQuarius Records. Don't know if anyone ever made it there. The brick and mortar record store in the Mission in San Francisco. Really curated collection and inventory, very niche, styles of music that they would feature. And when I think of Andee and just what the common thread, I think, throughout his music career, I really think of him as an advocate for independent artists, for kind of the underdogs, for kind of music on the fringes of the mainstream. And he's really, throughout his whole career, been a supporter of that, an advocate for independent artists. So he is now what happened to the projector? He is now the senior manager, I just want to make sure I get your title right, senior manager of catalog and creator services at Pandora. And soon the projector will come back to life. And he also is the head of metal and punk programming at Pandora. So he's a curator, he's a DJ, he has his own radio show. There's so many things I could say about Andee. But I think he has a lot to share about for artists and musicians and music creators interested in just trying to navigate the world of music streaming and just finding their own path in the music ecosystem. So with that, I will turn it over to Andee, and hopefully the projector will come back. All right, so thank you so much, Andee.
Hey everybody, thanks for taking time out of your day to listen to me talk. Adria did leave out one important thing, is that she was in a band with me very briefly, and it was very sad that she, I think you actually quit to do this or to go in this direction, so while I'm very happy for her, it was very sad for me. As she mentioned, I am a full-time music curator at Pandora. I have 2 different jobs. I manage the catalog and curator team, and we specialize in helping artists navigate streaming, and we help independent artists get better at being artists, which is always a challenge. And then I'm also a programmer. Really quickly, I'm just going to walk you through some of the stuff that led me to where I am, and then talk a little bit more in depth about what I do, where I am right now, how I got there, and if it's of interest to people, how you would get there too, in terms of that trajectory in the music industry. So that's me. I'm wearing a mask, so I figured I would put those up there so you could see what I actually look like. As Adrian mentioned, I have been playing music my whole life. I've been a drummer since I was 9. I've been touring and recording since I was 17, which was a long time ago. I played in a ton of bands. I just threw up a couple slides of, this is the band she was talking about, A Minor Forest, that was like my main band during the 90s. We toured the US like 40 or 50 times, and we went to Europe and West Coast maybe 30 or 40 times, put out a bunch of records. This is from my current band, and the reason I put this up is because this was the realization of a music dream of mine. This is when we played in Transylvania, which, was very exciting. Although, to be honest, Transylvania is very much like San Francisco. Romania is really weird, but Transylvania is very full of coffee shops and bars and stuff, so it was a little bit disappointing. And then one of my personal musical highlights was I did 2 performances with a band from Japan called the Boredoms, and one was in 2007, and we did it with 77 drummers, and then we did it again in LA in 2008 with 88 drummers, and that was super cool for me. But I am still I have 2 bands, both recording, both touring, both making music. A lot of the time when I'm talking to artists, I also talk about what your definition of success is. I talk to a lot of artists who want to be rock stars and who want to be, which is great, which is where I was when I was 20. But now I'm 52, and so having a band that can put out records and tour and go to Europe occasionally and not lose all my money, like that is success to me. And so a lot of my talking to bands is like sort of figuring out what success means to you and how to get there and how to manage your career to get to that place. As Adrian mentioned, I also ran a record label called tUMULt for 20 years, and I put out 50 or 60 releases. A lot of music that probably no one's ever heard of. I did put out the very first OCs record, but it was way before anyone cared who the OCs was, so I didn't sell any. I also ran a record store called aQuarius Records, which was had a worldwide audience because we did this mailing list where we did tons and tons of reviews. And in fact, there's actually a documentary coming out later this year about the record store. I'm just blazing through the stuff just to give you sort of a little context about what I do, and then I think the rest will be more sort of focused on a career in music. I've also been doing radio shows my whole life. I currently have 2 radio shows, and you can tell by what they look like, what kind of radio shows they are. One is here and one is in the UK, and I've been doing those both for a while. I am also a photographer. I take pictures of mostly dead leaves and skulls and kind of like a goth Ansel Adams, maybe. But let's talk about how I ended up in Pandora, because that's kind of interesting. Because when I was younger, there was a definite path for musicians where you would play music, and then suddenly when either you couldn't or didn't want to play music anymore, there was this career path that sort of involved record labels. And you would often go and be an A&R person or something like that. That model doesn't exist so much anymore, and so a lot of musicians, of course, end up at DSPs, at streaming services. And so our mutual friend, Diego, he used to work at another record store, and we were really close friends, and he started working at Pandora, and then this job came up that I think to most people seemed like the most miserable job in the world. And he thought, man, who would want to do this job? And he thought of me. And he was correct. It was basically, we had this system where it was a lot harder to get on DSPs back then. And so there was this system we had where if you were just an independent musician, you could send us your CD or send us your MP3, and we would listen to it and we would basically like review it. And so this job was essentially reviewing demos all day, every day. Like I think I did 50,000 in 3 years. And so I know that sounds horrible, but it was actually really, really fun. And I got to hear the most amazing music. I got to hear the worst music. It was really, really fun. But when I got to Pandora, there was like, so when I first got to Pandora, we had to keep it a secret too, because I was still working at aQuarius, and streaming services were kind of like the enemy. And I know a lot of you are probably too young to have, like one of the people we worked with was really young, and his whole experience of music was iTunes. And so, but for the most of our customers, Spotify and Pandora were the enemies. And so for 2 years, we kept it a secret from our customers, and I would work at Pandora during the week, and I would work at aQuarius on the weekends, just because we didn't want people to freak out and be upset that I had gone to the other side. And the ironic thing is we eventually closed the store, and then Alan, who was my partner at aQuarius, now also works at Pandora. But it had me from an artist perspective, it had me reimagining streaming, because having grown up in a record store, I never really listened to, that wasn't my preferred way of listening to music, but I recognized that that's how younger people and that's how people currently get the bulk of their music. And so it had me sort of reassessing what streaming meant, and it really gave me this perspective of it was really confusing how streaming worked, because as I'm sure all of you know, especially those of you who are musicians, there's always this like, oh, Spotify sucks, screw them, the royalties are terrible. And one of the first things that someone told me was, in the old days, if you got a record played on the radio at, let's say, 5 p.m. on a Friday, and it played one time, 500,000 people heard that song. If your song gets played on Pandora or on Spotify at 5 p.m. on a Friday, one person hears that song. So in that sense, it's totally different. But in another way, it's very similar, is that they both exist sort of to be promotional. And so when I talk about music with people that I'm presenting to, it's very holistically. I think I'm getting sort of off track, but it's very like, it's not just about streaming. It's about streaming and about playing shows and about having merchandise and having a Bandcamp page and just sort of a really, really more holistic picture of how that works, how being an artist works. But anyway, so when I got to Pandora, I did that for a few years, and then gradually we sort of started turning our team. Well, the big turnaround was when our team split up and I became a manager, and we had the opportunity to sort of reimagine what a team at Pandora could do. And for me, my whole life, other than playing music, my whole life had been about helping artists. And at aQuarius, it was discovering underground artists and selling their records and helping them get heard and helping them get on tours. And same with the record label. It was about finding bands no one had heard and spreading the word. And so for me, I wanted to figure out a way to do that on a bigger scale with this new technology. And so it took a few years, but eventually the team I'm on now sort of crystallized, and it's 5 people right now, and it's musicians, DJs, former record store employees, former record store owners, all people who play music, who love music, who can speak the language of music. And so we were this little island. Pandora, and I think DSPs in general, until fairly recently, were very listener focused. And as you know now, with like Spotify for Artists and what we're doing with Pandora, there's a shift towards a focus on creators. And so we were very much like pushing that agenda at Pandora in the face of a company that was like, oh, we're all about listeners. All we care about is listeners. And so over the years, we sort of got more and more support. And then over maybe the last year or two, We developed a whole set of tools, and that became sort of my focus at Pandora. And so now at Pandora, my team spends the majority of our time reaching out to artists, teaching them how to use these tools, and sort of in the process, whether it's part of it or not, teaching them how to use Bandcamp and teaching them how to print t-shirts and where to get merch made and how to go on tour and how to find a booking agent and all the stuff that comes with being a band or being an artist. And so when I was younger, there was this magazine that used to come out, and it's probably before all of you guys, but it was called Book Your Own Fucking Life. And it was like this DIY magazine that all these people all over the country would write in, and if you did shows in your garage, your address would be in there, so bands would have access to your, it's a little obsolete with Facebook and Instagram and whatever, but at the time, sort of pre-internet, it was this beautiful Bible of you could book a whole tour out of this little book. And so I kind of wanted to reimagine that sort of support system for artists. And so while I took a sort of roundabout route to Pandora, once I got there, I spent all of my time sort of pushing in that direction, and it sort of paid off. And so I think I just did both of these. But really quickly, I wanted to say, so the other thing I do at Pandora is I do programming. And so I'm a part-time programmer. I do all the metal, and I do all the punk, and I do all the new age, and I do all the experimental. And that is basically as fun as it sounds. It's like making mixtapes and playlists all the time. And for me, it's been for teenage me, it's been huge, because I was like a little teenage metalhead when I was 15. And so far in the last year, I've got to do things with Judas Priest and Motley Crue and Def Leppard. And so telling my mom all that stuff was probably the best part of it, where I got so much grief for being a metalhead when I was a teenager, and then telling my mom that that's now sort of my job was hugely satisfying. Another part of the mom aspect, by the way, I had very little time to prepare for this. I was supposed to do this in a while, so I'm really kind of winging it. So sorry if I'm bouncing between topics and flying through it. But the other thing that I often talk about when I'm speaking to artists and speaking to students, especially music business students, my path to Pandora was more of a rock path, because we just sort of advertised. There is actually a job right now to be on our team, which is the coolest team at Pandora, but a lot of the requirements are must have a certain amount of experience, but must also have a degree. But my path involved dropping out of college, because at the time I wanted to be a rock star and I wanted to go on tour. And so I always feel weird telling people that, oh yeah, my path began with dropping out of school. But I think the funny thing is that, well, there's two parts that are funny. One is that I ended up sort of in the same place where I think I would have ended up anyway, just having the music experience that goes with a career in music, regardless of finishing school. And where I was speaking to the mom thing, is it was only 2 or 3 years ago before my mom stopped asking me when I was going to go back to college. So half of my job, maybe not half my job, but it's programming, and programming is really fun, and we deal with record labels and directly with artists, and especially my team, we're always talking directly to artists. We go to conferences and festivals, but we're there specifically to help artists make sure their music is spinning and make sure they understand how their music is performing and sort of what to do with that information. And for those of you, I'm a musician, so I recognize that musicians are typically very bad at everything but making music. And so having as much data and help with that data as possible can go a really long way. The main thing, though, that we do now, and this is usually what I speak to, is we created this whole set of tools called AMP, which is the Artist Marketing Platform. And since we created those, they were initially created just to be tools for artists, but since then, they have become the sort of foundational program for all of Pandora. So even internal programmers use it. These are the same tools that we use for Drake or any superstars, but they're the same tools that are available to you or to me, which I think is really exciting and definitely demonstrates sort of a commitment to artists that I always wanted Pandora to have. And for those of you who are musicians and who are interested in the minutia of this, we do free webinars all the time, but I can tell you that we have one of the things we do that's probably the coolest to me is we have a very robust voice tool, which allows you as an artist to record your voice, record intros to songs, record outros, record director's commentaries for your whole record, create playlists where you're talking about each song, create mixtapes of your favorite artists where you talk about how they influenced you. It's a really, really fun thing for an artist, and if you're an artist on a streaming services, which I imagine some of you are, you should definitely look into signing up for that at Pandora because it's super fun and it's super exciting. It's probably the most exciting tool, I think, for artists that we have. Beyond that, we also have something called Featured Tracks too, which is free as well, and that's the other important thing. If you're an artist and you're on Pandora, we have featured tracks, and those allow you to boost your spins, and they're free to all artists, and you should definitely use them. Any artists in this room who are interested in learning more about this stuff and exploring more about their music on Pandora should reach out to me directly. You can get my email from Adria. It is exactly what I do, what I spend all my days doing, what I love doing. I think I might have just really raced through that whole thing. Yeah, so really that's, I don't know if that's enough, or I hope that people have questions, but yeah, so that was sort of my musical journey and my sort of journey to Pandora. I'm more than happy to get more into detail about different things. I know that generally these things are probably better shorter than longer, so if it's over shorter, that's fine. I just wanted to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions, and if you don't want to ask questions now, you can definitely reach out to me via email, and I can talk at length about any of the stuff that I touched on.
Yeah, maybe we could open up to questions, and then if people's questions subside, I have a couple things that
Okay.
we'll touch on.
Yeah.
Or yeah, you just go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you very much. Really, really interesting. I guess, obviously your commitment to the individual artists is really clear. And I'm curious, when you're dealing with the well-known bands and you're putting together playlists and so on, how do the artists lobby? Do they have lobbyists that come and, try to sell you, hey, feature my music? And how can a baby artist kind of compete with that if that's the case?
That's a super good question, and then that's actually there is a whole team. Oh, I just steal your chair. So for instance, I was just doing something with a very big artist, and even with this very big artist, I have to add them to the sheet. This sheet has to go to this meeting. Everyone in the meeting has different priorities. Depending on whose priority is the most important, that's the one that gets what there is to get. So in this case, it was a billboard in Times Square, and everybody wants that, but there's only 2 of them. And so I've gotten it twice, and both times I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it. But it's very challenging. And so the whole point of my team is sort of to give, there are certain things that a small band could never get at a place like Pandora, and that's like a Times Square billboard. But opening up all the other things to those bands, that's a big part of what we do. And a lot of it is sort of strategizing, is understanding how to use the tools, when to release a single, how to promote it, when it's most effective to promote it. I think smaller bands definitely benefit from having some hand-holding. but yeah, and I mean, I'll tell you, I hate it. The reason I'm still at Pandora is because my focus is on smaller bands. Like, when I was speaking before about the trajectory where you would go sort of A&R and go the whole label route, like, that whole side of the music industry is super schmoozy and super gross, and it's super corrupt, and there's lots of like favors for favors, and this band, and if and there's also the consideration of maybe not even the band you're talking about, like, where they're like, well, this is a band that we're trying to do cool things for. They're on the same label as this huge band. If you ever want this band to do anything for you, you have to do this band. And so that stuff is awful to me, and so I would rather just like help smaller bands, because it's also, we're discovering that it's really easy to, it's sort of before when I was talking about gauging success. Like, for a band like mine, an extra 1,000 listeners is huge. An extra 10,000 listeners is super huge. Whereas, like, if you got Drake an extra 1 million listeners, he wouldn't even notice. His team wouldn't even care. Like, so there's a little bit more tangible. You can make a more tangible difference, and you see it in every part of it. Like one of the things we struggle is to get artists to share things. And, people are like, but if we get Drake to share, that's 10 million people. But getting him to share something is impossible, and he also has no personal investment. He has a team, but when you talk to artists like my band or any of your bands, like, you have an investment in this. You care. You're going to want to share. You're going to want to promote your stuff. And so it's a little bit extra work, but to me, it's easier to get 1,000 small artists to care and do something than to get one huge artist who doesn't care to do something. And so it's challenging, but I think it's important for me to make what I can available to smaller artists. And a lot of that is just sort of working within the system and trying to, like, sneak your way into certain things, but also just kind of how to understand how things work, Hopefully that answers the question.
Could you describe the artist marketing platform a little more, and how it maybe compares to, like, Spotify for artists, if that's something you...
Yeah, I can. In fact, that's what I do most of my life. So I just didn't want to bore people who didn't care. That's why I automatically slip into that. So, like, 4 years ago, we created this set of tools, and we had a few artists at Pandora, and the artists all got together, and they were like, what are the most valuable things we can create? How can we create them to make them really simple to use? How can we make them really effective for not just huge artists, but for small artists? And so we came up with this sort of really compact set of tools, and they're basically the two that I mentioned: Featured Tracks, which takes a song, it puts it in front of a new audience, typically a new audience that's open to new music and specifically open to the kind of music you play. And then the other is artist audio messages, which again allows you to record an intro to a song. And we discovered that, there's something called novelty bias, which is true with a lot of things, but with music especially, where if you're a huge fan of Olivia Rodrigo, you absolutely do not want to hear her new single. You want to hear the single that you love. And so when she releases a new single, it typically kind of bombs without help, because people don't want to hear it. They want to hear the thing that they love and that's familiar. And so we found that with smaller artists, having an introduction in the artist's voice, describing the song and talking about the song, definitely decreases the amount of skips and increases the amount of time people spend listening. So giving a song like some personality and some context can actually make it more exciting for a new listener, or even a listener who's like, oh, I like this artist, he sounds cool, I want to check out their new song. So those were the two sort of foundational tools. And then the artist audio messages sort of spun off into multiple different tools. There's a promote single tool that combines those two tools. There's also a promote show tool, which allows you to, when you use the tool on Pandora, it automatically populates with the show if you have tickets for sale. with like Ticketfly or something. So all you do is enter Chicago, and it shows you the place you're playing in Chicago, a link to buy tickets there, and then all you do is record, hey, what's up? We're going to be in Chicago next week. Click here to buy tickets. And then that goes to all of your listeners in Chicago. So in like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, you can promote a whole tour with your listeners on Pandora. And then more recently, we added two cool things. One was the stories that I was just talking about, which are the hosted playlists and mixtapes. And then the other is track reporting, which is really, really, really deep dives into the performance and the data on each individual track, where you can see who's listening, where they're listening, how much time they're spent listening, what stations your songs are getting played on, who your music's getting recommended to, how long those people are listening. And then it gives you all of this actionable data too. Like if your music is being recommended to, say, some random band and you've never heard of that band, but your music's doing incredibly well, you have this actionable insight where you're like, okay, I need to know more about this band. Should we be playing together? Should we tour together? Should I reach out to them and see if we can open for them? Like, there's a whole bunch of really critical data you can glean from that tool. And that was sort of the most recent addition. And then we're in the process of sort of a huge revamp, which will be sort of a new mobile version of AMP that'll have that and a bunch more new tools and new improvements, which is really exciting. But you can see how much easier it is for me to talk about that than my own stupid stuff, because I talk about that stuff every day. But yeah, if you're a musician, if you go to amp.pandora.com, sign up and take advantage of this stuff. The other difference between Spotify for artists is this is all free. Like everything I just described is free and will never cost money, because I don't think it makes sense. I think the value of supporting an artist and helping an artist far outweighs whatever tiny amount of money you could make from charging people. So yeah, but we do have a lot of people pushing for us to charge for it, but I don't think that will ever happen. Not while I'm here, so.
Couple of questions. What is your business model? Question number one. That is, how does your company make money? And then question number two is, how many plays does an artist used to have in order to make the money?
I barely hear. I heard the business model part, and then I couldn't hear the second part. How many plays?
How many plays does somebody need on your platform in order to get minimum plays?
Oh, I have no idea. It's the same. I'll tell you the two. So both of those questions, thankfully, are not my part of the business. In fact, I'm strictly not allowed to talk about royalties, because royalties are constantly being, are constantly being fought about in court. I mean, the best I can do is, so as a business model, Pandora makes all its money from advertising. Most of Pandora's listeners are free listeners, and they listen to ads, and ads are expensive on Pandora. That's it. We have a subscription, we have on demand, but the majority of that money comes from ads, which is not weird. But the other part, it's, it's a big conversation, like royalties. It's kind of, I hinted at it before when I said, like, oh, a single play on terrestrial radio goes to 1 million people. A single play on Pandora goes to me. Like, those don't have the same value. But historically, they have the same purpose. And it's hard because if we're looking at streaming as, I'm not supposed to talk about this, but if we're looking at streaming as the be-all, end-all of surviving as an artist, then yeah, the royalties are totally off kilter. But it's also hard to sort of to come up with an equivalent for like one person spinning something one time versus the sale of a single or a record. Like, those are really hard to sort of, it's like apples and watermelons. But for me as a musician and as a lifelong musician, and maybe not privileged, but because I started playing music before there was the internet, radio to me was always promotional. FM radio was like, there were bands like whoever, Van Halen, who made tons of money on the radio. But for the rest of us, if you got your song played on the radio, all that meant was you were going to sell a bunch more records, or a bunch of people were going to come to your show. Like, it was it was promotional up to a point. Like, before you became a superstar, radio was promotional. And I feel like to be a successful musician, you have to sort of make your peace with that model for now. Like, I was telling Adria earlier that when I talk to people about Pandora, they're like, oh, come talk to us about Pandora tools. I often spend the first half an hour talking about Bandcamp, because I'm like, you shouldn't just have streaming. You should have records for sale. You should have t-shirts. You should be playing shows. You should have a Patreon. You should, it's sort of it's a whole different world being an artist now. And some people do get lucky, like on Pandora, there are a lot of new age artists who, because new age is a different kind of listening, people listen for 8 hours, 12 hours at a time. New age listeners can get millions and millions and millions of spins, and you've never heard of them, but they get played in every yoga class and every whatever. But that's sort of an anomaly, So I can't really speak to the amount of spins. Like, my Facebook is constantly full of like, did you know it takes 400,000 spins before you could buy a hamburger or whatever, but it's mostly, it's like people trying to pick a fight, and it's a thing that's being discussed and being debated forever. I would love to see artists get more money. I spend all of my time trying to help artists succeed. I don't have a lot of control over that. So I can't speak to it, and I can't really change it in as much that I try just to help artists do as well as they can within the system that exists right now. If someone called me down to Congress and asked me, I would be like, yeah, you should pay artists way more. And they're like, well, if we paid artists $1 a spin, Spotify would go out of business, Pandora would go out of business. I'd be like, fine, that's great. Like, we would think of something else. Some new company would figure out how to run a company that paid $1 a spin. But until that happens, I'm trying to just help artists with the tools that they have. Does that make sense?
What's some advice you have for younger artists without much exposure to the actual industry and finding additional bandmates?
For finding bandmates? Oh, that's a hard one. I found somebody great once on Craigslist, but I went through like 50 horrifying hangouts. So I'm not sure I would recommend that. It's okay. That's a tough one. I guess I would do it the same way I would do anything. I wish I had better advice. Facebook, Instagram, you live here, right? So you're kind of in a sweet spot. There's a lot of, Bay Area has tons of amazing musicians. I don't have a good recommendation. Historically, the best way to find a great band member was to steal them from another band. Right? Because you already know they're good, and if you watch documentaries like that Motley Crue documentary, they were like, oh, your band's terrible, but come sing for us. That's kind of like, it's kind of mercenary, but I think if you're like, I want to make it, and we want this killer singer, we want this killer drummer, I hate to say it, but that's what I would recommend. Yeah, because there's no real good directory for just like artists looking for bands. Sadly, it is Craigslist, and Craigslist is full of like crazy kooks. So I would say steal somebody great.
There is a website called Bandmix,
Yep.
where you can go on and you can create a profile, what you're looking for, and all that kind of stuff. So it's free to use, and if somebody's looking for a keyboardist or whatever you play, you'll get contacted through that. So, and you can extend your geographic range. So it's called Bandmix. Definitely try that.
Did you say band mix?
Yeah, Bandmix.
Oh, that's great. I'll start recommending that. That's cool.
It's sort of like playing off of that. It'd be great to talk to you like every week. Like, this is what, and of course we can't do that. So what resources are there out there where, for sculpting the musical identity and marketing programs and that kind of stuff, what resources do you see that are available? You mentioned Bandcamp, which is, other ways to sort of, push and market and all that kind of stuff, aside from social media.
I'm not sure that there really is a good one. I actually was talking to someone the other day about, I'm about to move into the woods, and so it's totally apropos of nothing. And part of me was like, oh, I need to, I'm still going to work at Pandora because I can work remotely, but I was like trying to think of things the world needed. And one of them, it occurred to me that was like the band version of a life coach, or like a band whisperer who sort of really understood who, and I'm not saying that would be me necessarily, but I think that would be really amazing to, and I again, I try to do that with my, I'm generally called on to talk about Pandora, but to his point, Pandora doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like it's worthless if you're not also doing all this other stuff. And so I try to make my presentations much more well-rounded and talk about Patreon. I have a woman a friend of mine who's writing a book via Patreon. So she's writing a chapter a month via Patreon. But beyond that, she's also having an artist friend of hers contribute an original piece of art that goes with each chapter, and then doing some sort of profit split. Like, it was really an original idea, and I thought that was super cool. And I think a lot of it's just thinking of original, like using the infrastructure we have in original ways. Sadly, I don't think there's like a place to go for really, really holistic advice that covers everything. I try to do that to a degree. Once a month, I host like office hours where people come and listen, and you can talk about anything. Like, sometimes we talk about cats, sometimes we talk about horror movies, but obviously we're supposed to be there talking about music. But I have been thinking more and more about just sort of creating something like what you're talking about. I also wish Bandcamp would do something like that. Like, Bandcamp has so many cool things. See, here I go again. But it's hard to figure out if you're not like a pro. I feel like they should be doing workshops, like how to get the most out of Bandcamp. And, maybe I'm doing that at Pandora, and maybe by example, more people will do that as well. But yeah, I don't know about a place where you can get sort of career guidance at that level, You can always talk to me, though. You can get my email from Adria, and you can email me every week. It's totally fine. I decided a long time ago, this was a big deal for me, because when I started joining at Pandora, I thought Pandora was this, just like all the other companies, this huge faceless behemoth. And if you wanted to change something, you would write and you would get an automated response. Or like it was just like trying to change your cable. It was like anything. And so when we started doing this, I was like, okay, screw it. I'm going to give everyone my email. I'm going to be the face of this thing. I'm going to make myself totally accessible. The last time we went to this, if you guys know what CD Baby is, they're like a distributor. We went to the CD Baby conference, and we did a thing like this about AMP, and we talked for a few minutes. And then I was like, yeah, if you guys have any other questions, like, we'll just hang out here and we'll talk. And we sat there for like 8 hours, like for the whole rest of the day. And it it's exhausting, but it's kind of worth it, because that kind of stuff didn't exist when I was trying to do this. When I was trying to figure out how to tour and how to, we were sending tapes and faxes and letters, and I try not to slip into the like, oh, I had to walk 5 miles in the snow to be in a band, but it was crazy. Like, when you look at people today and you're like, in an hour you could book a tour on your phone via Facebook. Like, it blows my mind still sometimes. But yeah, so anyway. But yeah, you can get my email from Adria or from me after this, and I will be happy to help you with whatever I can help you, even if it's helping you with Bandcamp or, like, I am an old punk rock dude, so and my new band started during the pandemic, so our whole existence is Bandcamp. Like, all our sales were on Bandcamp, all our promotion was on Bandcamp. Obviously, we did like social stuff, but like for physical sales and stuff, it was all Bandcamp. So, and I signed up for Bandcamp Pro, which is $10 a month, totally worth it. I can tell you why. Like, I want that to all to be part of something. If you go to an expert to ask them about something, you don't want them to only be like, well, I work at, Popeyes, so I can only tell you about Popeye's chicken. I can't tell you about anything else. You kind of want to be able them to speak to everything. So, hey.
You mentioned that usually musicians are good at playing music but suck at everything else.
I say that as a musician, by the way.
Do you have any advice for having a little bit more balance between everything else and the music? Because like that rang true with me. I kind of suck at everything.
Well, so I used to think it was lame when smaller artists had managers. I always thought that, I always was like, why do you have a manager? It's just your friend who can't be in the band is your manager. And that was always like, but in today's world, I've sort of noticed, like, I've seen that more, and I think having someone who's better at that stuff to help you isn't such a bad thing. I mean, it's hard because, like, what's more fun, like making a song and recording a song or sending 30 emails? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's never gonna be fun, but you just kind of have to make it part of the process, like to me that is now fun. Like, it didn't used to be fun, but like talking, like, would I rather be talking at a school or would I rather be playing drums? Like, I used to be like, oh, I would rather be playing drums, but now I'm like, this is super fun. Like, I like doing this and I like talking to you guys and I like sharing things. I'll give you my, like, are we on time? I will give you something that I think is the best advice that I ever thought of for artists. And it's super hippie, but it's like, so my approach to sharing your art, and I think this is super valuable, whether you're a painter, whether you're a musician or whatever, is whatever you do, send your art to all the people who have influenced you, to all the people who have made art that has moved you or that you care about, like your favorite band, your favorite singer, some cook who works at a restaurant that you love their food. Send them all your art, but send it with no strings attached. Like, don't reach out to some band and be like, oh, I love your band, here's my band, sign us, take us on tour. Like, just reach out and be like, hey, thank you for the music you made, the art you make. It like changed my life, it meant a lot to me. I just wanted to thank you by sharing the stuff that I made. And then leave it at that, and then be done with it. And do that with everyone. Every time you come across someone and you're like, oh my God, this person I love so much, and now I have their Facebook page, I'm gonna do that. And then you'd be surprised, like without asking for anything, you're like naturally creating this like holistic network of people you care about and people who are doing stuff that is meaningful to you. And you'll be surprised, but a lot of them will take it upon themselves to reach back out to you and be like, oh my God, I love that. We should make a record together. Or, oh, you're a cellist. Do you want to play on my next record? Like it becomes this really organic alternative to like gross schmoozing, and it allows you to reach out to the people that you respect and care about and love and worship and want to be connected to, but it doesn't put any weird pressure on them. And then I think the bonds that form after that are much more powerful. I know that's sort of like a tangent off what you asked me, but doing that, I think when you're trying to promote what you do, that makes that much more satisfying emotionally, instead of like, oh, I'm gonna send this to some crappy magazine, you're like, oh, I'm gonna send this to the person who made that record that like made me cry every time I listen to it. And even if you get no response, that they have your record, and that means a lot to me. I think that can be really powerful. In terms of making the rest of music making fun, it's just not. Like Adrian and I have a friend who is like the smartest guy we know, like maybe the smartest guy I've ever met. And he has not dealt with his royalties because he finds the royalty process so confusing. And so he's like, I just don't care. It's not worth it. And he's like, he loves that stuff. He loves figuring out Diego, right? He's just like, that's too complicated and I don't care. So to a certain degree, you're gonna like it comes with. I think the measure of success on that level is like, I mean, I don't know what this is like, but I know at some point you have a roadie to set up all your stuff, and then you just come out and play, and then go back to the backstage. That's a measure of success, and I think there's a measure of success where you have someone who you're like, hey, can you email this club and ask them about this? Can you email the recording studio and organize this? And then you don't have to do it anymore. But I think until then, you just have to just consider it part of like, it's the small price to pay to get to do the thing you love and get to do the thing you love more and better and more often. I know that's the worst answer, but like, there's no magic bullet to make like figuring out tours or getting shirts made fun, It's work, but it's it's the work that lets you do the work that's the thing that you love doing. So
I was going to ask you, I think you just kind of answered sort of the secret sauce to, how to promote yourself, I think. I was intrigued when you talked about the thousands of songs that you listen to, and how do you, like, what marks something that what catches your ear? And when out of all those, and when it does, what do you do with it? Where do you place it to promote it? How do you?
So for that job, I had to be very overly objective. Like even Adria did it for a while too. We sort of tried to spread the wealth, so it wasn't all on just a few of us, but it ended up people would prioritize more important things and it never got done. So, but I was faced with listening to tons of Christian music, tons of holiday music, tons of reggaeton, tons like things that not only do I not necessarily like, but that I'm maybe not even familiar with. And so in that sense, I could only do the best that I could do, where I was like, I always used a specific band that used to make people mad, so I won't say the name of the band, but I would use a single band and I'd be like, okay, let's say I'm a huge fan of this band and this song came on. What is my reaction? Am I super psyched? Do I want to look up more songs by this band? Do I want to skip it or smash my stereo? Like, what was the result? And that would be sort of my my homemade barometer of what to do with it. Thankfully, I mean, I still do that to a degree. As a programmer, one of the things you do as a programmer is you are very cognizant of trends and of even in the kind of music I do where it's not hit driven, I still know that like, oh, this band is blowing up and this song is really popular, and oh, this song was on the the new episode of Russian Doll or whatever, and so you kind of know. And so with those, you have a little bit more power with what to do with those songs. In those older instances, I would just surface the songs to the right people. So if it was some hip hop song that was amazing, I would send an email to our hip hop programmer and be like, I know I'm just this random dude here, but this song sounded great to me. If you like it, program it. And I felt like that was as much as I could do in that case. Now that I'm a programmer, I have a little bit more agency, but still the same thing would happen. Like if someone sends me a hip hop song, I would send it to J1, who's our hip hop guy, and be like, hey, check this out, you might dig it. And hopefully, and I feel like at that point I've done my due diligence. If it's in my world of programming and I like it and it's great, then I will program it. I'll put it on stations, I'll put it on playlists. As for what specifically, I don't know. I think that's what I like about music, is that it's really ineffable, Like I couldn't tell you, like I like really weird music. But I love pop music. I love power pop. I love, Charlie XCX. I love but I program a lot of metal, but I couldn't tell you why exactly or what I like about it. Like physically, it's just like songs really, it goes back to the way I describe music, which is in a really hippie way, where I think if artists are being really true to themselves and they're making music that resonates with them. I always use this example. I was in this punk rock band for a while. Very, very generic, just very generic punk rock. But the singer was like this super educated person who was into radical politics and really obscure 80s industrial music. But for some reason, what I took from that whole mess of information was this generic punk rock that he wrote was like genuine and true, because it wasn't weird industrial music. It wasn't hyper informed by his politics. It was obviously what he was like hearing in his head and what came from his heart. Like, you know, because to me, I feel like a lot of artists are like trying to be as transgressive or as weird or as punk. But I feel like since he was choosing this really, I mean, this might be me just like self-fulfilling, but like for me, I was like, I love that he's playing this music. And to me, that means it's like the music that's meaningful to him and the music that he thinks of when he's writing music. And so for me, that sort of translates into how I hear music, where I feel like after years and years and years, I can tell if your band is just like, you're doing something cool and original and you don't care what people think, or you want to make a big hit, you know? I know it's not 100%, but I feel like I connect with bands who are doing something original and doing something that you can tell they're just like driven to do. Like they would die if they didn't make that song. That's exciting to me, so.
Yeah, so besides punk and metal, you said you also program experimental?
Experimental and new age.
Okay. And I guess like within experimental, I mean experimental, it's a pretty nebulous category. So like, are there any subcategories that you tend to focus on more?
I volunteered to do experimental because my record store was very experimental and my tastes are very experimental. So I built a station called the Outsound, which for me was a place where like experimental rock would go. And that's anything from like post-punk to like basically anything sort of rock based, but kind of outside of the ordinary. I tend to lean a lot on, I personally like drone music and like minimal electronic stuff, soundscape, synth stuff. My band is just drums and synth, so I have very soft spot for synths. But stuff in the world of programming, like a lot of experimental music gets folded into electronic, it gets folded into dance. So like the dance programmer does a lot of the like ambient, and for some reason that is just always how it worked at Pandora. I don't know how it works in other places, but like even like a 40-minute guitar piece would often end up classified as dance just because it's like ambient. But yeah, personally, I'm like super into drones, heavy drones. I also like, I don't know, power electronics. But at Pandora, we're very sort of limited. There's not a huge audience for that. I've been trying to build that audience. And so that Outsound was meant to kind of be a reflection of Pitchfork a little bit, but just mostly the like more rock side of Pitchfork. And there's some metal and some punk, but a lot of it's like post-punk and even some folky stuff. But yeah, experimental is so broad, it's barely even a genre, but you know, I just wanted it to exist, so stuff that I liked had somewhere to live at the place I work, you know.
What do you recommend for like people or students who want to get more into music management or promoting, like local artists?
Say the last part again?
Like promoting local artists and working with them.
Oh yeah, the world always needs more of that. Needs really capable promoters and people willing to book shows and people willing to do the legwork for that kind of stuff. I think I've met a lot of people who aren't musicians but love music, and so they're taking like the music business path. And I think when I was just in Texas and I met these 3 kids from Ohio, and they were just telling me how great their scene was. They had like all these punk rock bands and it was really fun, and they played in backyards and stuff. And then we talked for like an hour about and I think they even started working on it, but about them building some sort of community center where, and like stuff's so cheap down there where they could rent a building and they could have rehearsal spaces that were really cheap. They could have a venue on one side. In the basement, they could have a screen printing shop and they could print t-shirts for all the bands. I think anything, if you love music and you have a capacity for it, anything you can do to support artists, like all the stuff that artists can't or don't want to do, and if you are good at it, is a huge contribution to the cause. Like I think, and I will tell you that being a touring musician, like bookers and promoters that are like smart and honest and know their shit, like are so valuable and so critical to that ecosystem. That's like very, very noble path you're on. Was that a question? Was there more of a question than that? And then just...
No, that was pretty much it, yeah. Because I know you were saying that a lot of industries like Pandora, Spotify are searching for people with more experience. And so like starting off with that, it's, I guess.
Oh, I think that is exactly the kind of experience. Like there's two jobs right now. One is on my team and one is on the team that I'm on above. And we have two people that we're looking at, both of whom are really young, but are very enthusiastic and in the short time, like one of them's 21, so there's no way they could have 5 years of music industry experience. But I feel like that's a whole nother conversation. Like I feel like when you're trying to get a job like this, you can definitely, it's all how you parlay your experience, even if it's a little bit of experience. I'll tell you a really funny story really quickly. When I got my job at Pandora, I had been working at aQuarius for 22 years. So my resume for Pandora had one job on it. My entire resume was a single job, but I sort of made it into all the things I did running my own business. You know, I was like, and I put my band on there too, because I was like, oh, I booked tours, I made t-shirts, I paid payroll, I did taxes, we did inventory, and so I made my record store job and my band the entirety of my resume, and I got the job at Pandora. And at the time, it was something weird, like getting a job at Pandora was like getting accepted to some Ivy League school or something, like the likelihood, and I was like, yes, I didn't even graduate college. But I think it's really in how you present it. Like for me, the person who's going to be perfect for my team is not, the 3 people or the 4 people who I've looked at already had tons of experience, and I could tell just from looking at their resumes that they weren't going to be right. Like they weren't, again, it's like the music thing. I was like, there's just something about it that's like, doesn't click. And I think if you're like, again, if you're doing something you love and you're following your heart, that'll come through. It does to me, for sure.
What was it about the 21-year-old's resume that stuck out to you then?
She was just really, well, to be fair, she was a intern as well. So I actually talked to her. But everything she did in school was music. And she also listed music that she loved on her resume. Like her resume was very much designed for the job, which I think you should always do, obviously, but she had like really put together this really beautiful, like, I'm serious and I have a lot of, functional knowledge, but I'm also creative, and without just having like a goofy looking resume, she was able to be creative in the context of the stuff she listed, And then when you compare that to like one of the other guys who was like obviously like seemed like kind of like a business dude who had been like a artist manager, and it seemed very like black and white kind of.
I made a DistroKid account literally yesterday, but I was wondering if Pandora Amp can go alongside that, or even CD Baby.
Oh yeah. So those are so DistroKid and CD Baby, those are aggregators, and that's how you get your music on DSPs. Once you're on the DSP, Amp is totally separate. Amp works with your music on Pandora. So as long as your music's on Pandora, then yeah, then you can just sign up for your profile and you have access to the amp tools. You can email me or get my email from Adria and I can help you. But yeah, once you're on Pandora, then it's basically just like a single click and then you have access, and then probably you might have to come listen to me talk one more time to learn the tools, but small price to pay.
Some of the distributors, like in their own interface, have, I don't know, are they able to connect you automatically to AMP at all, or do you have to just take the extra step afterwards?
All they do is deliver your music and keep track of royalties for you. Everything else is separate. Yeah. Like Spotify for artists, you have to sign up separately on Spotify. Yeah, or if you want, I should have made a slide. Oh yeah, by the way, I did want to make sure that I didn't leave this one thing out about my path to Pandora. I don't know how if most of you aren't old enough to remember Different Strokes, but I was on Different Strokes when I was a kid, so that was my close call. My path could have gone terribly wrong right there, but yeah, if anyone wants to come up and ask questions or give me their emails, or I can give you my email, and I'm more than happy to help any of you with anything you got going on music-wise. Thanks a bunch.